They do not have a scooper like Bevo's handlers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is like a man walking on the moon. Never before. Oh my Lord! Oh!
Bevo!
Oh! Eli Stein's the snapper, Reed Bowers the holder, and here is Cam Little to take the lead for the Hogs. It hit the top and rains down into the end zone.
And welcome everyone to Lone Star Yell Fight, where we're talking all things college football, Texas Aggies, Texas Longhorns, from the greatest country in these United States. Welcome back everybody to Lone Star Yell Fight. We are here with our favorite yell leader, Andy Tom Chesson. Well, okay, I don't know. I just kept saying, I keep feeling like I call you our favorite Aggie, and I didn't know if I should freshen things up, but apparently I won't use that one again. Andy Tom Chesson, there was a good weekend of college football, man. I don't know. You got to watch as a fan.
Yeah, I think 2 weekends in a row is a really good weekend of college football. And I think it's interesting. I saw somebody on one of the forums that I perused bemoaning that there are no great teams anymore. And I think that is probably accurate if your idea of great college football is having two teams that are head and shoulders above everybody else. Mm-hmm. I think what we're seeing now 3 years into NIL and unlimited transfer is that parity is going to be the rule of the land. And while there are certainly going to continue to be haves and have-nots and better teams and worse teams, there are no perfect teams. And even a team that's undefeated, number one in the rankings, has a couple of things that maybe their fans are concerned about. Maybe it's slow starts. Maybe it's, the inability to stop Oklahoma. I'm kidding. Y'all didn't have any problems this week.
No, I do think you're right, though. And it's funny because you and I are obviously we're fans of other sports that have seemed to have struggled to create parity. And the parity in those sports all feels like a lesser product, whereas I feel like the product just seems to be better overall in college football compared to certainly the NFL and even baseball to a lesser extent.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who didn't watch or was watching the Ohio State-Oregon game or even the Ole Miss LSU game, those were great games. They were frustrating probably if you're a fan of one of those teams because things didn't work out for half of you, but those were really good games. I wish your game had been a little bit better. That would have been a nice afternoon capper, but that game was pretty much over in the middle of the second quarter. It's funny because I don't know if you've watched the ESPN win probability charts. They're funny when there's a big comeback because it's and you see it in baseball, but in football, you guys, the closest you came was a minute 20 left in the first quarter. You had a 72% chance of winning the game. And it just went up from there. And at halftime, all the way through, it was at 99.9%.
Well, that feels like in the business a good segue to talk about the game. I'm curious as what you saw from it. What I saw as a fan, first of all, Texas has now won 2 of the last 3. 2 in the 2 that they've won has been like the 34-3 this week and then 49-0 2 years ago. As somebody who I know you follow this from a distance, OU has really had Texas's number for the better part of almost 2 decades. It's nice to feel like maybe the worm is turning a little bit because even last year's loss easily could have been a win if they make one more play. It just from that perspective, it feels like maybe things are starting to shift when it comes to that particular game. I'm not going to get upset about 34-3. Yeah, the Oklahoma offense was pretty ineffective. I don't know that many people could have had trouble starting them, but still keeping somebody out of the end zone at this level is still a thing. And I do feel like Quinn Ewers started very rusty, but ended pretty strong. I'm curious as to what you saw from the development of the game as someone without burnt orange glasses on.
I felt vindicated because one of the things I said came to pass. Quinn Ewers and the offense had a slow start for Texas, and that made Oklahoma look better than they actually were because offensively, Oklahoma couldn't do anything. Defensively, I think they were in the game for, like I said, part of the first quarter and then got worn down. And ultimately, that's, your offense isn't helping your defense at all because there's no even though Oklahoma did win the time of possession battle, which I think was the only thing they won last weekend. Maybe they got some free Fletcher's corny dogs. I don't know. I hope so for their sake. But, yeah, they held the ball for 32 minutes to your 27 and change. Great. But they could not generate offensive drives. That had a lot to do with their inability to just create offense because they couldn't run the ball. They certainly couldn't pass the ball. They have like 4 or 5 wide receivers on that were out for the game. But that isn't an independent factor when it comes to Texas's defense. Texas's defense played really, really well and was able to stop the run and basically dare that Michael Hawkins to pass, and he can't complete a pass downfield, so you win the game. Yeah. And then offensively, once Texas got out of the first quarter, you're very efficient. I think the thing that should frighten other teams about Texas this year is when you had a little bit of adversity in the first quarter, and even in the second quarter when Auburn missed that pretty easy field goal, it didn't bother you. You didn't have a Framber Valdez moment where you sat and dwelled on it as a team for the next quarter about, missed opportunities or whatever. You just took the ball the next possession and went to go score. Even though it wasn't, 31 points isn't close, those last 10 points were scored while the game was pretty well decided. The game was, like I said, pretty well decided by halftime. I don't think the final score really demonstrates the amount of domination that you guys had. And ultimately, yeah, it's great on the coaches. I think Texas had a good game plan. OU had some ineptitude and some injury issues. But you guys, you were talking about the series. I think for the first time in a long time, across the board, you guys just out-talent them. And in college football, the saying still is, it's not about the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. And I think for a first time in a long time, across the table, you guys have better players. And I don't think it's one side of the ball or the other. And I think that just showed up on the field. Frankly, Oklahoma's lucky to have won a game in the SEC, and it took a miracle to come back against Auburn a few weeks ago. So 1 and 2 feels right for them in the conference right now. I'm struggling looking at their schedule because admittedly, they have a much harder schedule than either of our teams do the rest of the way.
Right.
I'm struggling to see where they have three more conference wins.
One of the things I was impressed by, in retrospect anyway, when Texas hired Sarkisian, it's like they knew that the SEC was coming and they wanted somebody with experience that could build that kind of team. And it looks like they're at least on their way to doing that. Oklahoma went the opposite direction. How hot is Venable's seat going to be? Like you said, look at their schedule. They might not win another conference game. Can he survive not making a bowl game?
One more year, yeah. I think next year, you're looking at behind your back. And I think the problem for Oklahoma is the issues they're having this year outside of wide receiver health don't necessarily get better next year. Like we've talked about, their recruiting has fallen off a little bit. They've been cut off from California and all parts west. And with Texas in the SEC, with A&M in the SEC, with LSU in the SEC, with Arkansas in the SEC, you've got 4 other programs right in their neighborhood who offer the same thing, and you don't have to live in Norman. So outside of those kids that are north of Dallas that really grew up being Sooner fans, I don't know what talent base they pull from. Oklahoma as a state doesn't generate enough talent to man one D1 team, much less the 3 they have in that state. So it's going to be really interesting if they don't figure out how to recruit, how to play NIL a little bit better, and start getting some guys on the offensive side of the ball, because I think they recruit well defensively. I don't think they're set up to play a high-powered or a superior offensive team. And the SEC seems to be moving towards that more than being very defensive-minded 21-14 type football games. So Oklahoma is going to have to adjust. I don't know if Brent Venables is the guy to make that adjustment because offense hasn't really been his hallmark.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that because, it's moving in a direction that Nick Saban did not want them to move in, but that's what's happening.
And then he went and did it. I mean,
he went and did it because he's not.
I hate high-powered offenses. Now I'm going to hire Lane Kiffin and then Steve Sarkisian. I mean, you always have to listen to you always have to watch what Saban does versus what Saban says, because those two things aren't always congruent.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, let's get to this week. A&M is first of all 14 in the polls, and I mean, like, just a quick blanch of their schedule. They only have really 2 games that I think, if A&M plays to their potential, that they will be challenged by. Obviously, the Texas game at the end of the year and LSU. Overall, though, feeling pretty good about where the season is, because compared to what you thought it would be starting in August.
Well, I think your key word there, and you gave me a flashback to Mrs. Kalenius in the first grade telling me that, writing on my report card works, but not to potential. Potential is a damning word, especially for the Texas A&M program sometimes. I would love to think that we've gotten over the hump, and there's a lot of fans who are cautiously optimistic, and I'm probably in that camp right now. Starkville is a place of horrors for us. We've walked in that place a number of times over the past 12 years. Ranked team, better team than what Mississippi State had on the field, and promptly lost. I think we're 1-5 in Starkville in the 12 years that we've been in the SEC. So that game gives me pause. On paper, we should win. I think the FPI or whatever ESPN calls their little ranking system has us favored like 82% to 18. Yeah, whatever that means. I mean, whatever that number happens to represent in ESPN's world, great. We should win. And I think this is a big test for the Mike Elko era early on, in that you had a really impressive statement win against Missouri at home. And now you go on the road where, yes, he's broken the streak. We won an SEC game on the road in Florida earlier this season. But now you go to a place where we haven't played well historically. He's been part of those teams that haven't played well historically there when he was defensive coordinator under Jimbo. And so how businesslike does this team come out? How much do they continue to keep their foot on the pedal? It'll be very interesting to me, the offensive game plan, because, yeah, you're going to want Connor Wegman to continue to build on the game that he had against Missouri and throw downfield, and you need to throw downfield. But Mississippi State can't stop the run. And we have Le'Veon Moss, who is the SEC's leading rusher right now. If we don't feed him the ball and try to get too cute, that's going to be a concern to me. I understand that we will need to throw the ball downfield a little bit, and that's okay. But this is a game where we should be putting up 300 yards rushing. Mm-hmm. If we do that, we should win the game, because I don't see anything in Mississippi State's game, again, on paper, that says they should be able to keep up with us for 4 quarters. Having said that, we've got something in our DNA that has prevented this from happening for a number of years, like I mentioned. You get through this, then you've got LSU at home, which I know they had an impressive win, I guess, over Ole Miss. But like we talked about last week, Lane Kiffin doesn't win on the road against top 10 teams. Again, he didn't win on the road against top 10 teams, even though
right.
If you watch that game, Ole Miss should have won that game. And LSU has had a few games like that where woulda, shoulda, coulda, and they've managed to be on the good side of that. You'd like to think, and we'll talk to Brian Arbor maybe next week about it, but maybe that worm turns for LSU at some point this season, because you can't continue to get by on luck in college football for 12
right.
years. It's really hard. South Carolina, you can be worried about, I guess. New Mexico State, you shouldn't be. Auburn's not playing really well. And then it's Texas. There is still this world where that game on November 30th is not just for state bragging rights. And I would be very happy if that comes to pass.
Yeah, they could turn around and play the next weekend in the SEC championship game.
There's a really weird world where we could play 3 times.
Yeah, I guess it's true. Yeah. Well, part of that has to work out for Texas to get past Georgia this weekend. And I'm curious as to what you think about this game, because when I was thinking about the Texas season before we started the show this year, I thought Texas would lose one of the 2 games with OU and Georgia. Obviously, a lot of stuff happens. Texas is now favored, and using those same ESPN projections that you did talking about the A&M game, they have Texas as a 76% chance of winning that game over 23, which is just basically their analytics predictor. Texas is favored by 5. I feel like the Texas team that played last week committed too many mistakes to beat Georgia. But I also don't think that we've seen Georgia play their best game. And at some point, you got to wonder which one's going to play better. So I'm probably going to take Texas by a field goal with it being at home and in all of that fun stuff. But I'm curious, again, your thoughts on that, because it feels like it's a real – I think the Texas can make a real statement for their program for years to come by winning that game.
Well, I think the first thing that I noticed, and it kind of comes back to the past Saturday, is that the Oklahoma game this year was not a stress game for you guys. It is not a game where you had to exert yourself for 4 quarters, and not everybody had to, frankly, play as hard as they would have or play your starters for as long as you would have in a normal OU game. For whatever that's worth, part of the danger of playing OU on paper, again, preseason, OU and Georgia back-to-back, is – how much damage do you incur playing OU and then having to play Georgia the next week, who could take advantage of that sort of thing? I don't think that situation exists anymore. You guys should be well rested. You should be mostly healthy. I know you lost a receiver 2 weekends ago.
He's questionable, and he apparently practiced well yesterday. So
yeah,
I expect him to play limited.
So I think there's not a lot of injury issues or people that are banged up on your side. I don't know that Georgia has that either, but that was kind of the advantage that I think Georgia had coming in, and that's gone away. The other advantage I think Georgia has is that as well as you guys have played, you have not seen a quarterback as good as Carson Beck. Right. That's not me saying Carson Beck is going to have a good game. That means that from a talent level perspective, in my mind, he's a giant step up from anybody you've faced so far. He's not going to make the mistakes that Michael Hawkins made, for instance.
Completely agree. I mean, yeah, Texas is going to have to play its best game of the year to win.
Now, the good news is your defensive strength, from where I see it, is against the pass. Mm-hmm. So Georgia is going to have to generate a run game. You guys sometimes have trouble stopping the run a little bit. That'll be interesting. I think this is a better game than some people are anticipating. I think the home field advantage is going to mean something. It would not surprise me if either team wins, but by a field goal. Having said that, I've kind of got Texas by about 7. I don't know what the final score is. I don't like final scores. It feels like a one-possession game.
Yeah, I don't like final scores either. That's just pulling shit out of your ass. It's kind of where I'm at too. And I predicted the blowout last week, so I feel pretty confident that I know what this team can do, and I do see it as a one-possession game. One of the things that I took out of the OU game, though, that I was pretty impressed by was the emergence of the second running back. Jadavion Blue had some issues. He's had some fumbles. And then all of a sudden, this other kid was just gashing Oklahoma, which is a pretty good run defense. So I feel like Texas at least can be a more balanced team than maybe I think a lot of people think they will be.
Well, I mean, we talked about it. Running back's name is Whitmer.
Yeah, not Whitmire, like I keep wanting to say.
But like Whitmer or something like that. Anyway, we talked about guys who come out of nowhere in that rivalry game and have the game of their lives. I think that that running back, because Blue was struggling a little bit and Texas struggled a little bit in that first quarter offensively, just getting in a rhythm. He's a guy who came out of nowhere. What did he triple his career stats in the game? And I realize he hasn't got a lot of playing time, but we're talking about a guy who, how do you scout for the guy that you've never seen before? So it's good that you had that depth. Again, by the time he was gashing OU had, I know they're going to say they played hard to the whistle. They were getting it done. And that's fine. They're a quitter university who steals land, that's part of their heritage. So it's whatever. I don't know that I think Georgia's going to be better coached than whatever OU is throwing out there right now. It's going to be a step up in competition. And I think this is one of the interesting things about your schedule the last few weeks. Every week you've played a little bit better opponent, but not so incrementally so that it would be like this big, oh my God, what are we doing? And I think at some point college football fans need to get out of their bias and realize that you guys are the team right now. And maybe Oregon is up there with you. And I still think Ohio State's probably pretty close, that are those teams that can dominate no matter who their opponent is. And that's not me blowing smoke. That's just literally is everything is going right for Texas right now. And that starts with coaching. It starts with a system really where all Sark has to do is be the CEO and run the offense. I have it on relatively good authority outside of identifying players. He doesn't have to involve himself in the recruiting quite as much. He's the closer, so to speak, once you get him on campus, but he's not out beating the bushes trying to find guys. He's not worried about coordinating your NIL program. He's not worried about really what's going on the defensive side of the ball other than ultimate accountability. They've set him up in a really good position to play to his strengths. And good for you guys. You build a system that allows a coach to do that. You've had other coaches who wouldn't be able to do that. So, yeah.
The last two in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have that, and then you have the talent. And there's been, I wouldn't even say luck's been a factor to it, although when you have all those other things going for you, lucky plays tend to go your way. It's that whole
like the fumble out of the end zone.
Yeah, preparation opportunity makes luck, right? So it pains me to say on some level, but I think you guys are a really, really good team. And I think Georgia's a good team. And to your point, they have not played their best this year. At some point, and I think this is, bared out over the last couple of years, even if they're not as dominant as they have in the last couple of years, there is a point where they turn it on about mid-season and get better.
Mm-hmm.
Does that happen this week? And does that happen against probably the best opponent they've faced? Right up there with Alabama, certainly. If you're not better than Alabama, you're just as good as Alabama. So it'll be interesting to see how Georgia reacts to getting punched in the mouth a little bit.
If Georgia loses, that'll be their second conference loss. But I would think with 12 playoff spots, that doesn't close them out of the postseason at all. Would you say this? Would you say that same?
So it's going to be interesting how this all plays out, not for this season, but I think ultimately, what is a conference championship game worth to you as a program?
It's an extra game.
Right. So you want to win the conference championship. Everybody wants to be able to sell that merch and celebrate the win because you don't know what is going to happen after that. But if you're Georgia and you're sitting at 2 losses and the rest of your wins are really impressive the rest of this year, and you lost to Alabama and you lost to Texas, who are also teams that are probably playoff bound, does it benefit you at all to be in a conference championship game? I would say no, because the option there is that you lose a third game and that you're sitting at 10-3 wanting to get in versus 10-2 probably comfortably in. So I don't think this game does anything for Georgia's resume other than put them on what we think is a bubble right now. But as we've discussed in the past, there are teams that are going to get consideration in a 12-game playoff that wouldn't have in a 4-game playoff. Georgia was left out last year after losing the SEC championship game. I don't think a 10-2 Georgia team is left out this year unless you have a bunch of one-loss teams coming out of nowhere. So I don't think it certainly doesn't make or break your season other than maybe from a credibility standpoint, which I think is stupid, but I think there's still some pockets out there that are trying to find reasons.
I think there's members of our own fan base. I mean, I'm one of them where I don't want to get too over my skis on this because Texas hasn't been this good in almost 20 years. So I don't, I'm definitely still very aware of the idea that the bottom can fall out of this pretty quickly.
And honestly, I think I'm not saying you're going to lose a bunch of games, but I do think the schedule looks harder now than it did at the beginning of the season for the second half because Kentucky's playing really well last weekend. They're playing good defense. Vanderbilt's
America's team.
I don't know that they can pull out another miracle win, but I don't know that I'd want to play that kid either because he's got something going for him. He's got that team believing that they can win games that they shouldn't be winning.
And any fan of SEC shorts just wants Vanderbilt at some level to keep winning.
Who doesn't want that? I want that guy.
I just want him marching through our shot. Yeah.
We should reach out.
We should reach out.
Effort him. I think this is the beginning of a good run for Texas. It'll be, the playoffs are still an unknown because we don't know what the effect of playing 3 playoff games to win a championship is going to be.
Sure.
But right now, I think everything's rolling in your direction. It'll be interesting to see if you get a little opposition, how your team handles it.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit more. It's a little easier to predict than the baseball playoffs are, but just because the nature of the sport is so different.
Yes.
But you're right. I think, and it's interesting to be doing this. I think I jokingly told you at one point offline that I really can we just have the BCS back just for 1 year? Because I think then Texas only has to win 2 games, the Big 12 or the SEC championship, and then that. I want to go through some of the games though, man, because it's to me. I know we said this at the beginning of the show, but for as much as everything that could have gone wrong with NIL and all of that stuff, and obviously it still can, I feel like it's been a much more entertaining and much more competitive college football season than we've seen in a while. And I think there's some really, really compelling games that are happening this week. We've already picked both A&M and Texas to win this week. LSU and Arkansas is intriguing because, like you said, LSU, are they a paper tiger? Are they a real team? And as much as I don't want to admit this to our friends, Arkansas is not an easy place to play. Do you think LSU comes out of this?
I think at some point LSU's luck is going to run out. And I say that knowing that we play them next week. So I don't want to tempt the football gods, as it were. But Arkansas is a tough place to play. They have a really good defense. I'm not sold on LSU's offense. It's a good offense. It's better than a lot of other teams, but I don't know that they're certainly not as good as they were last year with Jalen Daniels. So their defense is bad. And if Arkansas's quarterback Green and their running back can run the ball, I think LSU's in a world of hurt because I just don't know that they can play catch-up football. I kind of see that game where Arkansas gets out to a early lead and then it becomes the trading blows. And I think it is kind of one of these, whoever has the ball last is going to win. But Arkansas can certainly put up points on LSU's defense. And I think that's the thing that some other schools haven't been able to do. Now, having said that, I would have guessed LSU would have been able to Ole Miss would have been able to put up points. So I think Fayetteville is tough. I think, Death Valley won that game for LSU last week. They don't have that advantage, so I'm going with Arkansas.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just so curious as to how long this Brian Kelly experiment in LSU is going to last, because it's never felt like a fit to me or to you.
LSU's interesting, and I know that we will get hate maybe from Brian Arbor, but prior to Nick Saban's arrival, LSU profiled a lot like Texas A&M. You had some very past high successes, and then a long wandering in the desert, so to speak. A number of coaches that they don't like to talk about who didn't do things despite the fact they had the market cornered on Louisiana talent. And this isn't just, they were off for a decade. It was tens of decades that they just weren't very good. Competitive team, never won anything. And then since Saban was there, they've won, 3 national championships?
Mm-hmm.
And that's somehow
the grass eater.
But it's raised expectations, and it should. LSU has all everything that you could want in a college football program to be successful, perhaps except for literacy.
I was waiting for it. I knew it was coming.
Who needs
I was going
to
to work
read?
in a gator wrestling joke, but
so it's not. I don't see, unless Brian Kelly is competing for SEC championships and getting a playoff spot, which I guess is still possible this year. I just don't see it happening the way they're playing. Unless he's consistently doing that, I don't think he has a long shelf life there. Now, they've got a pretty lengthy contract with him, so I don't think he's getting fired this year, certainly, and probably not next year. But if next year looks a lot like this year, I think that third year with a 26 or 26, that would be kind of a make or break. We're looking for another coach behind the scenes kind of year for LSU.
And we'll move off LSU in a second, but just to say that one of the things about LSU, similar to our schools, is they've got a deep enough pocket down there in the bayou that they can buy out a Brian Kelly contract if they need to. I want to talk about 2 more games real quick. First of all, Alabama-Tennessee feels to be one of the other marquee games of the week. Tennessee reeling still after that loss. And I know a lot of people expected Tennessee to have a chance to win the SEC this year. Is Alabama back, and is Tennessee a pretender, or is it the other way around?
I don't think we know yet. Tennessee got off to a great start offensively and looked like world beaters up until they went to Fayetteville to play Arkansas. And they've come down to earth there, and I think Arkansas exposed some things for them. I know they lost a receiver in that game. I don't know if he's back or was ever coming back. Alabama is consistently good, and as bad as that loss to Vanderbilt feels and should feel bad, nobody should lose to Vanderbilt like that. And there's a reason it was the first time in 50 years or whatever that outcome had happened. I trust their coach, and I know their fan base doesn't trust their coach right now, but Kalen DeBoer is a really, really good coach. He's a coach that has won 90% of his games, 90+% of his games as a college football coach. That's not easy to do no matter who your competition is. He's smart. I know he doesn't wear collars, evidently wearing a hoodie as the Alabama head coach.
That people care about? What?
They care because they lost. If they had won, they would not care. We've got to be mad at him, so let's hoodies. Looks like a thug.
Can you get yourself a quarter zip, please?
That's right. If he had wore a quarter zip, maybe he needs to get a sponsorship with Vore or one of the higher end athleisure wear clothes, maybe Roback. I don't know. Maybe he needs to look like he's just come from the golf course to coach a football game in a manly fashion. I trust him, and I trust Alabama's talent over Heupel and Tennessee's talent. This should be a good game, but I don't trust Tennessee's offense right now. I don't think it's nearly as good as we all thought it was going to be based on the first few weeks of the season. I think a good defense can stop them, and Alabama's a good defense. So I think this is an Alabama win, even though it is at not Neyland Stadium. Former A&M student, by the way.
Oh, I didn't know that. We're going to talk about two teams then as we get out of here. Two teams now that are left that have never trailed in a football game this year. They're both 5-0 and probably the subject of, if we're being honest, the biggest rivalry in college football. Army-Navy, man. How are you feeling about both those teams could be bowl eligible? We all know why they cannot compete head-to-head with a lot of teams, mostly because the military has height and weight requirements that most college football linemen far exceed. Good for it, but it's good for the sport, right? That these two teams, used to be good in the 30s and 40s, are finally look like they're playing well again.
Well, if you can't fit in the tank, you can't be in the Army. I mean, that's just a thing. And there's height restrictions on being a pilot for the Navy, so it all makes sense. This is one of those things that's good for college football. It's fun to watch Army and Navy be good at football. I don't think they're top tier teams by any means, but they've dominated. They've done everything their schedule has asked them to do, and they've done it in dominating fashion. So it'll be a really interesting game when we get to the end of November, when we're all sitting there, exhausted from conference championship games and waiting for that game in Philadelphia, because it's a great game. Even if you don't have a rooting interest, and you should, because it's the American military, and you should be appreciative of everything these kids do for their country. But I think it's fun. I think it's fun to have good football teams at every level. I don't pretend that either one of those programs need to be in this final conglomeration of 32, 64, 70 games, whatever that ends up being. But I think they go to a long way of proving that next level down can still be fun. It can still be entertaining. It can still be meaningful for their fan bases and for fans around the country. So I think it's great that both those teams are super competitive this year, and beating the hell out of their schedules.
Is it weird that I root for Navy?
No, Navy typically has better uniforms, so I know you're a jersey guy.
That's actually a big part of it. Also, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and they didn't take me, which maybe – but also Army officers right out of West Point, I don't know, they get people killed. So anyway, on that note, that seems like a good place to leave it. Andy, we will be back next week. Gig 'em for you guys this week, and I think you guys are going to win by at least 20 points.
I'll either be really happy or really sad. There's not going to be any in between this weekend.
No in between. For Andy Tom Chesson, our favorite Aggie, I'm Jim Christopher from the Texas Longhorns. We will see you next week.
Dig 'em.
Hook 'em.